Everyone, in today's video, we are going to be talking about why our bar is so low when it comes to our own mental health. So what do I mean when I say that the bar is so low for our own mental health? So this kind of idea of this came up when I was talking with a friend, and she was telling me about her experience with a doctor's visit. And the doctor was proposing a new treatment method for her to treat her depression. And she kind of reacted really, viscerally by saying well, no, I'm not suicidal right now. And this struck a chord with me because I think this is something that a lot of people who are dealing with depression particularly, but really any mental illness kind of grapple with when it comes to dealing and interacting with the medical care system. We've kind of been fed this narrative that we only really get services when we're in a crisis point. And that typically involves when we are suicidal or wanting to take action on ending our life or that kind of thing. And so this kind of visceral response came up for her where she was like, well, I'm not suicidal right now, as both a defensive mechanism and also as kind of like a baseline for where she thought she deserved care. And the reason why I bring this up is because it's something that comes up a lot talking to people who experience mental illness. And it's come up a lot for myself as well, as kind of that is where the baseline is. And that is a really low baseline to have and a really low bar to set for ourselves. So there's a few reasons why this may be part of our train of thought. There's the idea that I mentioned of it being when we deserve care from the medical system. But there's also the idea of, not believing that you really need to take any action until it gets to that critical point. And so that's kind of setting yourself up for failure too, in terms of waiting that long to take any sort of measurable action where it gets to that crisis point where it becomes a lot more difficult to move out of that space. And now this is even compounded further by kind of what I said earlier about the medical system being set up to respond to crisis situations. And that's kind of it. Personally, what I receive in terms of care from the medical system is very much around, managing medications. And that's kind of the care that I receive from my psychiatrist and my doctor and whatnot. And that's not really enough. And in terms of moving that bar up from, well, I'm not suicidal right now, and just treating the suicidal ideation or suicidal thoughts or actions, and moving that bar up to being more, well, I want to feel like I am living a full life. I want to experience joy. I want to experience a breadth of emotions. I want to engage in life the way I want to, engage with life. I want to engage with the people in my life the way I want to. I want to have goals that I work toward. I want to live a full life. And that should be, I think, where our bars are, and not, way down here where, well, we're not suicidal currently. So what can be done to raise this bar from the very, very low standard of, I'm not suicidal right now? So I think the first step really is to understand that you absolutely deserve to have a higher bar when it comes to your mental health. You deserve to have good mental health. Oftentimes people have described to me, or I've described to myself, that it feels like you're just kind of existing and it doesn't feel good. It feels very much full of inner turmoil, and it doesn't feel good to be, in the world. And that's a really awful way to exist and participate in life and in the world. And so raising that bar to kind of address that and create some level of peace for ourselves and some level of fulfillment and joy and whatnot, because we deserve to experience that. And then beyond understanding that we deserve a higher bar, I think that advocating for yourself is a really important component of this too. And kind of not being afraid to go to your doctor, go to your care team with concerns that aren't way down here where, you're feeling suicidal. If you're struggling in any way with your mental health, going to your doctor and voicing how it's impacting your life is really important, and kind of advocating to receive care before it gets to a critical point. And now I don't want to place all the onus on the individual either, because it really shouldn't be, your duty to advocate for this level of care. I think there's a degree of responsibility that needs to come about at a societal level in terms of understanding the importance of having good mental health in society. I think there's still a long ways to go in terms of understanding that mental health is a very, big component of healthcare. I come from a country where we have alleged universal healthcare, but things like therapy, visits with a psychologist are still not covered. I pay out of pocket to see a therapist, and I don't think that that's something that people should have to do because it really is a big part of treating, your overall health. I'm also a huge proponent of doctors being able to do things like social prescribing, and this just means where they can prescribe things like art classes or gym memberships or, various life things and ways to participate in life for their patients other than just prescribing medication. And this idea of social prescribing gives the doctors power to do more than just adjusting medication. And I think that this is a really important thing in terms of raising that bar from not being suicidal to raising that bar to being, thriving and living full and meaningful lives. I think another important component to look at in terms of all of this from a societal level is the idea of how we view an individual's well-being or success. And it is often centered around how productive they are. And so it's kind of no wonder that the way our current system is structured, that the medical system would operate when the person is at, a crisis point of being suicidal, because that would seriously impede their productivity and, their ability to contribute economically. And so something that I want to touch on as potentially a way forward is what Bhutan actually does. Bhutan is a country in Southeast Asia, and they have actually adopted a gross national happiness, or sometimes referred to as gross domestic happiness. And this is the metric that they use for their country's success over GDP, gross domestic product, which is what the vast majority of countries around the world currently use as a metric of success. And so what this gross national happiness measures is basically the happiness and the well-being of their citizens. And that is the approach, the government centers all of their decision-making around. And I am just kind of buzzing sharing this because can you imagine if your government was making decisions for your country with that as their, sole goal is increasing happiness and well-being of its citizens instead of just looking at really how much money the country can generate. I think that shifting our overall societal perspectives like this would do wonders to raise the currently very, very low bar of what we expect our mental health to be. And this all kind of makes me wonder about, we used to see suicide as a crime, because we felt that we had a moral obligation to prevent people from taking their own life. And it was seen as something that we needed to protect people from. And so, the language used to be committed suicide because it was a crime and because we felt this strong moral obligation to prevent people from doing so. But, if we had this strong moral obligation to prevent people from, suffering to the degree of taking their own life, why wouldn't we be working to prevent them from even getting to that point? And why wouldn't we collectively have a higher bar in terms of what we accept for a person's mental well-being? And it makes me kind of wonder, is our current objection to people taking their own life kind of centered around that idea of productivity and loss of productivity if they do end up taking their own life? And, that's kind of a bold and depressing and morbid claim, but unfortunately, I think there is some validity to it in terms of how our society is currently structured. So I suppose what I want to bring it back around to is that we all deserve to have good mental health. It does not need to get to a crisis point of feeling suicidal for you to deserve care or for care to be available to you. So thanks so much for watching this video. I feel like I got on a bit of a soapbox there, but thank you so much for following along if you did. My name is Lauren. I live with schizoaffective disorder and I make videos about living with it. And if you'd like to see more videos from us, make sure to subscribe. And if you'd like to help support us in creating this content, please check out the link to our Patreon page. It's in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, wishing you and your loved ones good health. We'll see you in the next video. Bye.